Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today we welcome back Michael, who is our, I guess, head of written research. You'd say these days, Michael, and you've just returned to Australia from Bali Blockchain Week. So I've got some photos up at the moment. Looks beautiful. Lots of attendees, and Bali's become a bit of a hub for all these conventions and that recently, as we spoke about in a video a couple of months ago, you guys, if you haven't seen that one. And as I mentioned before, Michael's been doing a heap of great written research in our premium platform, which is all now live. But yeah, we're going to talk about what's been happening on the front lines, and I guess it's sort of 2019 was the time we found a lot of the best projects for the next cycle, and here we are 4 years later. So it's, I guess it keeps that conviction when you hear about what's happening at grassroots level and the good projects and some of the projects that are maybe struggling. So we're going to talk about all that today. So yeah, where do you want to start, man?
Yeah, no, it's good to be here. I've had a couple of days now to catch up on some sleep because I tell you what, it got a bit hectic there for a good week. But yeah, no, we've got heaps have happened, that's for sure.
Fantastic. So what were some of the most promising projects, or maybe some of the larger ones, and that over the course of the conference?
So Bali's become a little bit of a hotspot. Like Singapore, obviously, is still really prevalent in the space, but now everyone's sort of realised that if you're wanting sheer numbers, Indonesia is a real value proposition, and so we've seen like a lot of particularly larger like layer one blockchains who have really started to set up shop there. The biggest one is Polkadot. So Polkadot has a formal presence now in Indonesia. They've got a Polkadot hub, which is set up in Bali. And so they were the major sponsor of the Bali Blockchain Week, and they were everywhere. And so were all of the different parachains as well. So yeah, they were the primary one.
I guess what's your thoughts on how Polkadot's going to fit into the ecosystem? Because I think your belief is similar to mine, that obviously Ethereum's sort of the biggest one at the moment. But how do you feel these other layer ones are going to fit in the picture with so much happening in the layer two space as well now?
Yeah, I think the conversations around Ethereum being challenged, I think, are over. Like, I don't think that gets challenged again now. Like, this whole narrative around ETH killers, like you see Aptos and Sui have said they're Solana killers. They've given up on trying to kill Ethereum. So I think Ethereum will always be the default layer one position. I think places like Polkadot specifically, obviously, I've spent a lot of time with their people over the last week. They've got a really unique value proposition, I think, where maybe some of the more niche use cases that are sort of the app chain thesis are maybe required. And I think maybe where scaling is, or the tech is kind of unique, or the use case is unique, that's where I think like environments like Polkadot are going to come into play still.
So what are some of the projects maybe on Polkadot that take your interest, that fit into those theses? And that's probably, for people at home, we've been trying to focus on, say, 10 to 15 of those biggest themes for the next cycle. So how do some of those promising projects fit into that for you?
Yeah, so for those that don't understand the Polkadot architecture, effectively Polkadot tries to be a layer zero that connects a whole series of different layer ones together. So instead of having Ethereum as the base settlement layer and then having layer twos built on top of Ethereum, Polkadot tries to connect a whole bunch of different layer ones together, and that's how the ecosystem scales. The biggest one that came out was Astar. So Astar is probably the largest Polkadot parachain by market cap right now. And their whole mantra was that they're the enterprise chain of Japan. And they've got huge amounts of deals with places like Sony, and even working with the Japanese government as well, where I think they're more specialized on enterprise and bringing on enterprise into blockchain that need something a bit more specific rather than a general, like a Ethereum ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they were the biggest one. That, like, the actual founder of Astar came out, Sota. He's a Japanese guy, and they were really pushing some of their solutions, working with Sony, working with Toyota, a couple of other really big Japanese companies, and I think it seems like Japan's really sort of jumped on the Astar bandwagon.
Okay, and that's probably a bit of a feel that we're getting. That NFT video we did the other day, we're talking about the big brands and corporates and sort of business dipping their toe in the water and getting on board. And maybe that's why, the market can often feel dead, but that's when a lot of the big boys that don't make a lot of noise, we see the sort of paddling under the water, but it all looks pretty calm on the surface. So I guess that's, good to know that sort of thing is happening broadly across crypto, still with that interest for those big companies.
Yeah. I guess the other two main use cases from the Polkadot ecosystem, Moonbeam was there. Moonbeam is just, I guess, an Ethereum compatible layer, except they settle onto the Polkadot ecosystem instead of settling onto the Ethereum base chain. And I guess that's what settles them from being a layer two. And the other one is a really interesting project, which we've got a write-up coming probably in the next week or two on, is a very new project called Interlay. And they're like a very small market cap right now, but fairly new blockchain. But they have, I guess their main claim to fame is that they are true Bitcoin DeFi. So as opposed to like a wrapped Bitcoin, which relies on a centralized company to wrap that Bitcoin, lock it on the on the Bitcoin blockchain, they have like a decentralized way of wrapping Bitcoin and then reissuing it onto the Interlay blockchain, which is part of the Polkadot ecosystem. And then they release it as IBTC, Interlay BTC.
Okay.
So really interesting how they've done it. So it's fully permissionless, non-custodial. Like Bitcoin gets locked on the Bitcoin blockchain in these things called vaults, and then it gets issued as IBTC, which can get moved all around different blockchains. So that was interesting hearing from their side as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah. We saw a lot of issues in the last cycle with some of those projects that were trying to do decentralized wrapped Bitcoin like REN and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that's an interesting concept.
Yeah. As far as other big ecosystems, XRP had a little presence out there, only a small one, but they've sort of dipping their toe in the water now that they've got a green light.
Yeah.
So-called green light. And the other one, again, was like places like the Internet Computer. They've invested quite heavily into Southeast Asia. I guess they're kind of trying to find their niche. For those that don't know the Internet Computer, they are or ICP, very unique architecture. They have this reverse gasless model where it's more of the developer pays the gas fee, and I guess you can host everything on chain, whether it's like the whole even front end of the website as well. So very, very different architecture for a blockchain, but they're investing pretty heavily into the region as well.
Yeah, that's another one that's down heavily, I think 99%, and had a lot of hype and big players behind it at the start. So interesting to see if they can bounce back. But you mentioned XRP. So as always, I kind of find that interesting in terms of what's the value prop initially with the banks using it. And I guess my thesis was, well, we're going to see stablecoins issued and private companies issue their own stablecoins, and we continue to see that with PayPal launching their USD and USDC continuing to grow. So what's your thoughts around that thesis? What are XRP kind of saying is going to be their value prop for them to succeed now?
To be honest, I don't understand. Like XRP, I don't know anybody that uses it, but like when we put out videos in Indonesia on our platform, they all pop. So I don't understand what's going on with XRP, or if it's just a speculative play. But I mean, same sort of thing. They think that they're going to be the settlement layer. They're going to replace the SWIFT banking system, and they're pushing for it. But I mean, if you are to ask my personal opinion, I don't see how that beats stablecoins on Ethereum.
Okay. I'd like to get an XRP, someone who's a bit of a guru, to give me an update to share the other side of it as well. Because, we hear a lot about the quantum financial system, and as you say, these settlement layers and so on. So, guys, if anyone's got someone who they think would be a really good guest to come on to give us the bullish XRP thesis, happy to talk about that as well.
Yeah, I'd be very interested to hear. Probably the three main others that were really represented over the last week was Polygon rolling out Polygon 2.0. We just did a write-up on the Nuggets News platform about that. Really interesting what Polygon's trying to do, how they're trying to unite all these different types of technology for scaling Ethereum, and they've now made a very similar architecture to what Polkadot has done, where all of these different chains all kind of connect to a central point, which then settles onto the Ethereum base chain, including things like supernets, which Polygon has released, which are very similar to Polkadot parachains, very similar to AVAX subnets, where people can kind of launch their own blockchain and use sort of the Polygon architecture and infrastructure to be able to host their own chain. It's almost like a layer 3 in a weird way.
Yeah. What was the feel in terms of the bear market, in terms of projects having runway left, maybe projects that have just raised, and that confidence in the next couple of years of surviving another cycle? What was all that?
Yeah, everyone's pretty excited, to be honest. Numbers were big. Like, we saw thousands of people come out to events just in a couple of days. You can see a lot of speculators are coming back out. People are launching new projects. I think a lot of people who have been holding off launching tokens have all started to issue their token, like thinking that now is the time to get in. You'd rather be a little bit too early than maybe a little bit too late. And I think the main talk is just around sort of Bitcoin ETF, Bitcoin halving, because thinking that this would be the two catalysts that really start sort of launching us into the next cycle.
Yeah, we've probably seen a couple of little themes play out for a couple of weeks at a time. One of those is probably those meme coins, which don't always have the fundamentals, but they drum up that popularity and community feel. And when we just hear about those extreme rises, 1,000x in a month like Pepe and, Shib and Doge. So was there any sort of those projects or people talking about they're excited about them, or how do you feel they fit into the ecosystem?
Now, I actually honestly think that a lot of people who are coming to events like this now are well aware of what they are and what these types of things are. So there's a lot of like NFT speculators, I think, that more get into that type of realm. But I think a lot of the core builders right now are, keeping a safe distance. Maybe might throw a few little gambling dollars on there, but I don't think anyone really still is hugely taking it massively seriously. I think Indonesia specifically, Philippines, a lot of people got caught up in it on the last cycle, and these are the people who have probably left the ecosystem. The one exception to this is I did see a big Bitcoin ordinals type sort of crew rolling around. So that's probably the one exception I would say.
Yeah, that's been an interesting one too. I mean, I know we shared a piece about how DeFi on Bitcoin could be a big theme coming into the next cycle. That was probably over a year ago, and then we did see stamps and ordinals take off. Those volumes have dropped off like NFTs and a lot of other things now, and prices as well. So what are your thoughts on that, or any chatter you heard about those?
I mean, people are still trying to build it. I think the tech got introduced. And I mean, if we look back to the last cycle, DeFi summer was sort of 2020, middle of 2020. And then we rolled around until Bitcoin halving, and then we rolled around to sort of into the main sort of bull market of 21. Yeah. And so I think we're still a little early, and I think this is maybe technology is getting rolled out that will probably get used in the next bull market. So maybe Bitcoin DeFi has kind of like been exposed now. It's getting battle tested. Maybe it does have a run, maybe it doesn't, but it's an interesting time frame that, people will know the tech well enough by the time sort of the market sort of picks up, I think. So who knows?
Yeah, for sure. And for people at home, there's probably a little, to give you a bit of a hidden gem, Sovereign was one that I quite liked, that were trying to do a stable coin backed by Bitcoin on Bitcoin and side chains, and we're hearing more about drive chains and all that type of thing. So the technology is slowly moving forward on Bitcoin. Obviously not as flexible as Ethereum, but as we saw, even though stamps and ordinals were clogging the blockchain and slow and very hard to use, like very early DeFi, if you get your head around that stuff and you know how to use it, there was some great gains to be made there.
Other real interesting one is the Russian community, who have a huge presence now in Southeast Asia since probably the war's broken out. There's been a massive amount of migration. Really, really, really into TON, so the open network being like Telegram's integrated blockchain.
Yeah.
And a lot of people building Telegram bots and like games that all sort of connect through that Telegram ecosystem. So I don't really know anyone else that's using TON or the open network besides like the Russian community, but it's very popular within the Russian community.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, relevant at the moment with Elon Musk seeming to make some moves towards integrating crypto along with, subscriptions, live video, talking about how he really wants to make that a lot bigger, wider vision than what we think of Twitter or X currently.
Yeah, I mean, I think as these use cases get built out, we saw like a really big push around sort of Unibot and these sort of like trading bots. And I think a lot of that automation stuff, that starts to bring speculators in again, where they think that they can buy an asset that's going to make them passive income. I mean, that's what we saw in the last cycle, sort of 60,000% APY if you stake this. Like that's the hype cycle that really does bring in a bull market. So I think that's a space to watch, because if that starts picking up, it'll be a pretty good indicator that new money's coming into the system.
Yeah. Another, I guess, theme that we were bullish on years ago that did really well was gaming, and AR, VR, that kind of thing. And I think that's one that is going to bounce back. A lot of those good projects are really beat up as well if you're still dollar cost averaging. But Southeast Asia was probably one of the places where we heard about a lot of players getting into Axie Infinity, for example, Alluvium and all the rest. So any interesting stuff happening in that space?
Yep, I saw the Alluvium team. They all came out. So they're all around in their Alluvium gear. And to be honest, there's a lot of hype around Alluvium, especially in this part of the world. I know a lot of people are fully expecting the game to be operational by the time the bull market comes out, and I think they're sort of drip feeding things out now. Like I think you can get an open beta for a lot of the stuff. I think Alluvium probably will be the biggest driver just because of how integrated it is. Like the brothers of Synthetics, of Kane, the founders. It's obviously been building for a long time. The other one that had a whole lot of hype around it was Star Atlas on Solana, but they did late last year cut off, I think, 60% of their workforce. But they are still about to start to bring out products, and we've heard whispers around sort of integrations in with Steam and things like that. So heaps of chatter around Star Atlas as well, though. So it's probably a one to watch still, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, it seems like a lot of these projects are still partnering, again, with the good businesses and big corporates, while token prices are down 90 to 99% for some of those gaming projects. So as I mentioned before, if you still like them and you can afford to dollar cost average, I think we're very close. Well, I still think the bottom's in for Bitcoin and Ethereum unless something,
I agree.
Another black swan. But as far as alts, some of them are still bleeding. So good time to be averaging in.
And lots of people building in that space as well. Like there was a lot of like racing sims all set up like in booths at the events. Like people have got like different types of, games that they're trying to roll out. And a lot of these are small players, but you see a lot of people who are already game devs who are now sort of trying their hand at like a Web3 style game. Yep. So there'll be a lot of people who will take a shot at that market for sure.
Yep. Another theme we've discussed is GambleFi. So similar to gaming, I guess. And again, this can be bigger in other parts of the world, I think. So any projects in that space that were there or that you're liking at the moment?
Gambling's pretty forbidden in Indonesia, so they didn't try their hand at that. But I know I would fully expect in a couple of weeks in Singapore for Token 2049 there'll be heaps of it there.
Yeah.
Indonesia's still not that favorable, so yeah, no one tested the water on that one.
So when you say that it's banned in Indonesia and places like that, do you think that's the opportunity? Because if it's decentralized, then people that are interested can do it, or do you think it is a cultural thing where they're not really into that?
I think there's two levels. I think on the surface level, there's like a lot of people who do actually practice their faith in this part of the world, and so I think a lot of people actually genuinely don't like that stuff.
Okay.
But then the second tier will be the underground market where, all it takes is a couple of clicks on a VPN and then it's available. So like a lot of the things which we saw in the Indonesian market specifically is a lot of these Forex companies that would come in and they would like purposely target Instagram ads at Forex platforms and have crypto integration as well. But they're legally not allowed to operate, but they still pay for ads into that market. So obviously people are still accessing illegal Forex platforms. So they're it will happen, but they can't have a formal presence. Like it's not like they can formally go and partner up with like a YouTube channel because then that YouTuber is in all sorts of trouble for promoting it. So there's restrictions around that.
Okay, cool. Any other themes we haven't touched on yet that were there?
Yeah, real world assets is the other one. A lot of sort of gold-backed stable coins, tokenized real estate, couple of really interesting projects that have working products already. So I know that there's a resort complex in Bali that's already started tokenizing villas, and they're doing it in the form of NFTs, fractionalized NFTs. So we can probably, if people are interested, do a write-up on some of these projects. They're very, very speculative still. So we'll see how that plays out. But there's a couple of working apps and working products that are running already.
Yeah, I think I did a research piece on real world assets and gave the top 10 that were by volume, because we've already seen, as you mentioned, property and things like bonds from memories in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of real world assets that some of these projects have already tokenized happening in a bear market. So that's pretty exciting. The other thing you mentioned there was gold-backed stablecoins.
Mm.
I think Maker DAO is continuing to take turns in wrong directions, and I think was it yesterday they were talking about moving part of their infrastructure to Solana from memory, and I think Vitalik actually sold a heap of Maker after that, and projects like Reflexer, which I've been bullish on. So one of our themes for people at home was that Maker DAO will lose market cap to all of these other liquid staking derivative stable coins and projects like Reflex's Rye coin, and some sort of stable coin that doesn't even necessarily track the dollar now that inflation's so high. It kind of just tracks, I guess, fiat currencies along with inflation to be stable-ish to keep up with fiat currency in general or gold in general or a combination. So that's definitely something I think is pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, I think I know in a lot of the Islamic world, they ultimately believe that everyone will return back to using gold as currency. And so I think all of the Middle East and all of like places like Indonesia, I think gold backed anything will be very, very popular. And so there was a lot of projects that were trying to tokenize gold and using it as like a gold stable coin or just tokenize gold that could be traded. So I know that that's like Dubai is obviously a huge hotspot in the world right now for crypto. Most people are going to go set up companies over there. What might cost you 100K to set up an entity in Europe or in the Caribbean somewhere is like a tenth of that cost to go set up in Dubai for a company. And these are the places that are into gold. And so tokenized gold on the blockchain, I think, is something to watch. There'll be heaps of projects that are starting stuff like that.
Yeah, especially with this movements by the BRICS nations. I think it's the BRICS 11 with the recent sign-ons. Whether it's purely gold or commodity backed with oil and that type of thing, as we continue to see more countries move away from the US dollar for sure.
Yeah, and I think watching the argument around like blockchains, like it's really interesting seeing that from Maker. The other real interesting one was obviously DYDX, obviously about to move over to the Cosmos ecosystem, and they were the other community that have been out to Indonesia lately, like Cosmos.
Yeah.
That app chain thesis, it'd be really interesting to see where the value add. We saw it in the last cycle. A lot of like really big L1s just never got off the ground again. And I think chains like Cosmos are at the pivot point right now. Like, are they actually going to find a value add for the Atom token, or is that just a tech stack like an SDK that people are going to be standalone blockchains? So they're an interesting one to watch because I think they could go either way right now.
Yeah, I listened to a good podcast when DYDX decided to make that move from Ethereum to Cosmos, talking about the trade-offs. And by the way, that was, I think, the biggest airdrop of all time that we covered back in the day. So yeah, can you get the liquidity and users and volume to move over away from Ethereum if you're going to do your app on another chain is the big question.
It's a really interesting move because they were the undisputed perpetuals platform, and then they made that announcement, and then all of a sudden a bunch of others all popped up and just sort of ate their cake.
Yeah, that's where it gave room for things like GMX that really popped as well. So for sure.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of those arguments are starting to really like be settled now. Like, no one's disputing that Ethereum's going to fail anymore, but there are still niche use cases which projects have to make that decision whether or not there's more value add in a different ecosystem or whether or not they just bite the bullet and end up back in Ethereum, which is now a really competitive landscape. But I think places like Asia are still very open to alternatives to Ethereum. Probably in Europe and North America, I think maybe less, but Asia is very open still to alternative ecosystems.
Okay, cool. Any other final themes you want to mention?
Yeah, there's still a lot going on for the rest of the year. So Token 2049 is the next big event in Singapore. That's on in a couple of weeks. I think a couple of weeks after that is the Philippine Blockchain Week, and that's a massive market still. Like, there was Filipinos everywhere spruiking to come to the Philippines. So they're like obviously competing pretty aggressively for market share at the moment. I know blockchain is pretty accepted and tokens are pretty favorable still in the Philippines. They can use like crypto as currency over there in the Philippines. And then back in Indonesia in November, because the Indonesia Bitcoin conference is on in November. Jack Dorsey's coming to Bali. So that's pretty big. Like, Jack Dorsey feels like he needs to come out and share the good word of Bitcoin out in this part of the world. So lots happening in around here. And I think from an Australian perspective, with being probably the one Western country in this time zone, it's a very interesting space to watch. I think as a lot of projects pivot more towards Asia, especially because it's just our neighbor just across the pond there.
Yeah. Well, we'll try and do a video like this monthly, I think, to just catch up generally on everything that's happening, as well as maybe try and get all the whispers from the front lines of these conferences. But any final thoughts before we go, Michael?
Now, keep an eye on the Nuggets News platform. We've got lots of research articles coming on most of the projects that we've mentioned today. So yeah, make sure if you haven't already, have a look, because there's more detailed reports on pretty much all of these projects. Anything that comes across the desk, we like to go and dig deep on.
Yeah, and I will do a deep dive walkthrough on all the different sections now that all the features are live and running, and you guys have been doing a brilliant job with all the written research. So thanks again for that, mate. I'll put all the links to follow Michael's socials down below as well, guys. But we'll talk again soon.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, guys.